Okay, the next item of business is a statement by Neil Gray on Scottish Hospitals Inquiry Interim Report on the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People and Department of Clinical Neuroscience, Edinburgh. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement. Therefore, there should be no interruptions or interventions. And I call on the Cabinet Secretary around 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to receive and I welcome this interim report from the Scottish Hospitals Inquiry on the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People and the Department of Clinical Neuroscience, both in Edinburgh. The overarching aim of this inquiry is to consider the planning, design, construction, commissioning and, where appropriate, maintenance of both the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital campus, Glasgow and the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People and Department of Clinical Neuroscience in Edinburgh. I would like to extend my thanks to Lord Brodie and his team for their hard work and dedication in producing this interim report, and I am grateful for the progress that the inquiry has made thus far. I am also deeply grateful to the many witnesses, especially parents, patients and their families, who have fully committed to the inquiry process and provided the necessary evidence reflecting their own experiences and that of their child. This has allowed the inquiry to produce the findings contained within this report and this 11 specific recommendations. I would also wish to extend my thanks to the staff at the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People and Department of Clinical Neuroscience in Edinburgh for their continued hard work and dedication. On the 4th of July 2019, the then Cabinet Secretary for Health announced that the opening of the new Royal Hospital for Children and Young People and the Department of Clinical Neuroscience in Edinburgh would be postponed due to serious concerns about patient safety and well-being. A public inquiry was then announced on the 17th of September 2019, with Lord Brodie appointed as chair soon thereafter. The inquiry's setting-up date was the 3rd of August 2020. The purpose of the inquiry is to determine how vital issues relating to the built environment of the hospitals, such as water supply, drainage, ventilation and other key building systems, gave rise to concerns about patient safety and welfare, how they occurred and what steps were taken and can be taken to prevent these being repeated in future projects. The Scottish Hospitals Inquiry, chaired by Lord Brodie, is rightly independent of the Scottish Government. As we consider the interim report, the work of the inquiry continues so that parents, patients and families and all those affected have the answers that they deserve, and that when lessons are identified, we take steps to implement the necessary improvements to ensure that we maintain the highest standards of patient safety throughout. All of us, whether for ourselves or through our families and friends, will have interactions with the National Health Service in Scotland, and there is nothing more important to me than ensuring that Scotland's NHS is safe and effective, and that all patients receive the highest standard of care that we would all expect in fit-for-purpose buildings. Turning now to the interim report findings. The remit of the Scottish Hospitals Inquiry requires it to determine how issues relating to the adequacy of ventilation, water contamination and other matters adversely impacted on patient safety and care occurred, if these issues could have been prevented, the impacts of these issues on patients and their families, and whether the buildings provide a suitable environment for the safe delivery of effective person-centred care. The remit further requires the inquiry to make recommendations to ensure that any past mistakes are not repeated in future NHS infrastructure projects. Without a doubt, patient safety is of the utmost importance, and the findings of this interim report will significantly contribute towards ensuring that lessons can be learned. The evidence before the inquiry and the interim report makes clear that safety is not a binary issue. There is a sliding scale of risk from safe to unsafe, which can be influenced by many factors which the Scottish Government and senior health board leaders must consider. And whilst it is right that the Scottish Government takes the time to reflect on the report's findings and the recommendation before responding more fully, I would like to take the opportunity today to talk about some of the findings briefly. A full response to the interim report from the Scottish Government will be provided in the coming months. The interim report confirms that the decision taken by the then Cabinet Secretary to postpone the opening of the hospital was the right decision. This decision understood the risks associated with the introduction of patients into a facility that had not met the required safety standards. Only through this direct intervention by the then Cabinet Secretary were we able to act and deliver the necessary changes to the built environment. The issue that led to the decision to delay related principally to the design of the ventilation system of the paediatric critical care department of the new hospital. Significant remedial works were carried out to the ventilation system to remedy the non-compliance. This involved extensive works to replace the ventilation system for relevant areas, and the results of independent testing and the expert evidence heard by the inquiry indicate that the remedial works have been successful. The inquiry has stated that the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People and Department for Clinical Neuroscience in Edinburgh environment is suitable for the delivery of safe, effective, person-centred care and has been since the facilities opened in March 2021. No evidence is available to the inquiry indicating any contrary position, and I am confident that this provides assurance to patients, parents and families accessing the hospital's vital services. It is, however, clear from the inquiry report that communications fell below the standard we would expect. The interim report talks in detail about some of the difficulties that were faced by parents, patients and families. The impact of unclear or poor communication on the well-being of parents, patients and their families during a very difficult, emotional and uncertain period in their lives is not to be underestimated. The interim report sets out that health boards must ensure that in the event of any adverse situation that could affect the well-being of patients and their families, there is a communication strategy in place to liaise with this crucially important group. It also says that the Scottish Government should ensure that this liaison is supported in any overarching communication strategy it may wish to introduce. For those that rely on the hospital and those that should have been able to rely on information about what was happening, I commit that the Scottish Government will improve, and I will work with health boards to ensure that we all learn lessons that put parents, patients and families at the heart of the decisions taken and the impact of those decisions. The report also raises concerns that there were a number of instances where a governance process or aspects of operational management were ineffectively implemented. I expect health board managers to address these concerns appropriately, with support from relevant NHS bodies, such as NHS Scotland Assure, to ensure that their governance processes are robust, open and transparent and fit for purpose. We have and continue to make improvements to policy and practices alongside our NHS partners. These include establishing NHS Scotland Assure to provide a coordinated approach to the improvement of risk management in new buildings and infrastructure projects across NHS Scotland. NHS Assure provides assurance that the healthcare built environment is safe and fit for purpose and has improved support to health boards on technical matters. Their work also includes a programme of learning that is intended to enable health boards to assist Assure in how it can better support other health boards about to go through the same process. NHS National Services Scotland is also in the early stages of developing and improving the existing standard contract for major capital projects, which will have clearer roles and responsibilities for those involved in the process to support governance, assurance and risk management. We have introduced a National Infrastructure Board to provide strategic leadership and expertise in driving forward a national strategy for infrastructure change. The board will ensure that infrastructure continues to support health and care service needs, seeks opportunities for doing better and provides national oversight on the continued safe and effective operation of the retained estate. NHS National Services Scotland have updated the National Health Technical Manual Guidance on ventilation. This update includes the role of design supervision given to the Ventilation Safety Group. The group is multidisciplinary and includes authorising engineers, expert technical consultants and clinicians. It is responsible for overseeing the management of the ventilation systems of a healthcare provider and expected to assess all aspects of ventilation safety and resilience required for the safe development and ongoing operation of healthcare premises. Although there have been improvements made, Presiding Officer, I recognise that Lord Brodie and the inquiry team have rightly drawn attention to areas that require further focus and improvement. The Scottish Government is committed to working with health boards and other NHS bodies to consider and address each of the 11 recommendations made in the interim report. I would stress that this interim report does not represent the conclusion of the inquiry's work and that its investigations into the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital and Royal Hospital for Children in Glasgow continue. We recognise the progress made by the inquiry through this report, and there are further hearings planned to run throughout 2025. We must continue to fully scrutinise what has happened in the past in order to maintain public confidence in relation to our healthcare provision and also ensure that vital learning is applied, and in doing so prevent similar circumstances from occurring again. And I will continue to update the Parliament as this work progresses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues arising in his statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes, after which we will need to move on to the next item of business. And I'd be grateful for members wishing to ask a question who haven't already done so to press the request to speak buttons. I call Sandy Sculhany.
In declaration of interest as a practising NHS GP. The hospitals were given the go-ahead in 2012. They were initially scheduled to open in 2019, and catastrophic ventilation system failures were found. And some 2 years later, the hospitals eventually opened, and over 2,000 appointments were disrupted. The inquiry's findings are deeply concerning, from catastrophic ventilation design flaws to a complete failure in communication with patients and family. This is a stark example of utter incompetence. And the SNP government has formed when it comes to secrecy, brushing problems under the carpet and poor financial oversight. Cabinet Secretary, this is a children's hospital for the children of Scotland. Patients suffered and families had to watch their children suffer. And as always, not a single manager or board member was sacked or held accountable. Senior NHS members have sauntered off into the sunset with their fat cap pensions. Given the serious failings highlighted in the inquiry, including ventilation design flaws and communication breakdowns, will the Scottish Government take full responsibility for the mismanagement of this project, and what specific actions will be taken to hold those responsible accountable?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. It's critically important that we have processes that are transparent, that we learn lessons where issues have arisen, as Sandesh Gulhani has set out. That's why I'm responding today to the establishment of a public inquiry that was established under this government to look at lessons that needed to be learned from the issues that he has raised. There are already areas where we can see improvement happening. The implementation of NHS Assure in all stages of a health infrastructure capital project ensures that we are able to learn lessons from what happened previously. Of course, this is an interim report. There will be further work to be considered. We will respond in due course to the inquiry on its interim findings and, of course, we'll seek to implement them and make sure that improvements happen in the commissioning of our health infrastructure.
Jackie Baillie.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his statement and Lord Brodie for this interim report, but the Cabinet Secretary will recognise that this is just one half of the story. In the case of the Edinburgh sick kids, unfortunate though the delay was and the uncertainty for families, thankfully no child lost their life, and I believe Jean Freeman was right to put patient safety first. In contrast, the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, Nicola Sturgeon's flagship, was rushed through when it clearly wasn't safe and children died as a consequence. We await the findings of Lord Brodie's final report, but what lessons have been learned to avoid taking such a reckless approach again, as appears to have happened in the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First of all, I appreciate Jackie Baillie's comments around the issues around the hospitals in Edinburgh and Jean Freeman's decision. I agree with her. I think Jean Freeman took the right decision, and that, I think, is played out in the interim report findings. I would caution Jackie Baillie around arriving at conclusions around the Glasgow side of the inquiry. That inquiry is ongoing. There is much evidence still to be led in that inquiry, and I certainly cannot prejudge or seek to cut across in any way the work of a public inquiry. Obviously, in terms of her question on lessons being learned, I've already set out, both in my statement and to Sandesh Gulhani, the implementation of NHS Scotland Assure, which is about making sure at every single stage of the commissioning of a health infrastructure programme that we have assurance as to the safety and the practicality of a health project, and I believe that is giving us much greater assurance as to the safety that Jackie Baillie is looking for.
Claire Haughey, to be followed by Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the Scottish Government's commitment to learn lessons going forward, And while I appreciate time will be required to fully consider the recommendations, can the Cabinet Secretary advise how he will look to improve communication in the future? And I remind members of my register of interest, I hold a bank nurse contract with Greater Glasgow and Clyde NHS.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, President Officer. I thank Claire Hockey for her question. I think it's critically important, it's obviously important to me, but to the public as well, that the NHS boards acknowledge that not only do the services exist to treat patients, but that patients and their families should always be given clear information about those services and their care, so that where that duty fails, we need to make sure it is rectified. We regularly meet with our NHS board communications teams to provide leadership, to collaborate, to agree common approaches to communicating information amongst NHS health boards and across NHS Scotland, and will continue to listen carefully to patients and families involved in the inquiry, but others further afield. And I will work with the health boards to ensure that we all learn lessons and put that at the heart of the decisions that are taken that impact on patients and their families.
Miles Briggs, to be followed by Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I remember this period well, as I served as Shadow Health Secretary and agree with Jackie Bailey in terms of the actions Jean Freeman took, and also establishing NHS Assured, which we called for from these benches. And I want to pay tribute to the whistleblowers who have put forward many of these concerns. But I also have to put on record my concerns around some of the evidence which has been taken in private during this public inquiry. Patient safety must be paramount, and the communication strategy the Cabinet Secretary refers to, the question is specifically in relation to how will this actually be independent to provide that transparency, because too often health boards go into lockdown when there's a problem, and we need to make sure that when these are raised, they're really taken to the top, to the Cabinet Secretary's desk. So I wondered what work will be taken forward to make it truly independent.
Cabinet Secretary.
So there are a number of issues there in Miles Briggs' question, for which I'm grateful, and I'm grateful to him for his recognition of the role that whistleblowers play. I have been absolutely clear, as I believe my predecessors have, on the culture that I expect within the health service around supporting people coming forward with concerns before it gets to the point of a whistleblower status. But there are very clear processes and protocols in place to support whistleblowers coming forward with their concerns, and I have a very clear expectation around how those are handled, both in terms of the seriousness that is taken around making sure that we have systems that are safe, but also in the transparency on the public communications that Mr Briggs has outlined. And we are working with our boards, as I've set out, in order to make sure that that can be realised.
Rona Mackay, to be followed by Sarah Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Comments on page 4 of the report set out clearly that this is an interim report and doesn't represent the conclusion of the inquiry, whose investigations into Queen Elizabeth University Hospital will continue. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that the ongoing work of the inquiry is of the utmost importance so that families and patients can get the answers that they deserve?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, President Officer. Yes, I absolutely agree with Rona Mackay. Inquiries are set up by ministers to examine matters of public concern about a particular event or set of events. They operate independently of Scottish ministers, and they have a crucial role in scrutinising the past to inform lessons for the future. As the Scottish Government considers this interim report, the work of the inquiry does continue so that patients and families and all of those affected have the answers that they deserve. We need to respect that process. And I'm incredibly grateful to all of the participants for the work and for the work of Lord Brodie and the inquiry, for the time, the effort and the energy that's going into this from so many dedicated people. The findings in this interim report will significantly contribute towards ensuring that lessons can be learned, so that we are able to take steps to implement the necessary improvements to ensure that we maintain the highest standards of patient safety across the health service.
Sarah Boyack, to be followed by Emma Harper.
What lessons are going to be learned from the experience of the sick kids? Because the Cabinet Secretary said that the impact of unclear or poor communication on the well-being of parents, patients and their families during a very difficult, emotional, uncertain period in their lives isn't to be underestimated. And I'm thinking particularly about the design of the new iPavilion in Lothian. It's been approved, but the existing iPavilion shut, and it's going to be years before it's replaced. So what lessons will need to be learned in terms of patient support and communications, and then the design of the new hospital so that it is built on time and it's safe from patient, staff and families from the day it's going to be ready?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think that's absolutely critical, and I think the experience of the necessary closure of the Eye Pavilion is an example where I think there has been better communication, both through government and through the Health Board, to patients, to MSPs. I was involved in the site visit to the Eye Pavilion with Sarah Boyack and others, so that there was that transparency as to the necessity of that decision having to be taken. Because it's not just me saying that we should not underestimate the impact that poor communication can have on patients and their families. It's what the interim inquiry report says. And so we must take that seriously. And where there are improvements to be made, we will continue to look at that, including learning lessons of live cases such as the one that Sarah Boyack raises.
Emma Harper, to be followed by Lorna Slater.
It is welcome that the Scottish Government acted quickly and established NHS Assure to improve how we manage risk in the healthcare-built environment across Scotland. Can the Cabinet Secretary expand on how NHS Assure works with boards to provide the coordinated approach to risk management across the NHS estate as set out in his statement?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, and I thank Emma Harper. The NHS Scotland Assure plays a critical role in ensuring the safety, the effectiveness of new built environment facilities in Scotland. The principal way in which this is achieved is through a key stage assurance review, which occurs at every stage in the capital investment process, from business case development all the way through to construction and commissioning of the new building, which is why I can say I believe that there has been sufficient, there have been lessons learned around the design process that was of concern in the case of the Edinburgh hospitals. By focusing on crucial areas like infection prevention control, water safety, ventilation, electrical systems and medical gases, the KSAR process provides independent assurance that healthcare building projects are being delivered in line with relevant standards and that they minimise risk to patients, families, staff and visitors.
Lorna Slater, to be followed by Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to ask the Cabinet Secretary what mechanisms are in place to track and report on the implementation of the inquiry's recommendations and any further recommendations they may bring as the inquiry progresses, and how will patients and the public be kept informed of the progress of this implementation?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank Lorna Slater for her question. We will respond in due course to the 11 recommendations formally to the inquiry. We will set out there around some progress that will have been already made against some of those recommendations. Some of that is wrapped up in the work of NHS Assure, but also, as Lorna Slater asks for, to be able to track progress against them and indeed anything else that comes in from the remainder of the inquiry, both in the Edinburgh sites and also the sites in Glasgow.
Alex Cole-Hamilton, to be followed by Stuart McMillan.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Lord Brodie's interim report provides us with an important opportunity to reflect on the lessons learned. I'm certainly pleased that we now have some clearer understanding of what happened at the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People at this time, as at the time many of my constituents were deeply concerned by the delays and confusion relating to the opening of that new facility in Edinburgh. And for those affected, it was unnecessary, with an extra layer of stress at already difficult times. As the Cabinet Secretary will be aware, there are a number of hospitals requiring renewal and replacement in the coming years, including Belford Hospital in Fort William, the Gilbert Bain in Shetland. So can I ask him, looking towards those projects, whether he is able to further outline what lessons have been learned from the Scottish Hospitals inquiry, so we don't find ourselves in a similar position further down the line?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. There's two elements to Alex Cole-Hamilton's question. First of all, the point that he makes around the feeling at the time that these delays were unnecessary. I think the interim findings demonstrate that the delays were necessary and that it was the right decision to delay. The difficulty at the time of the poor communications may have presented themselves in that feeling that these delays were unnecessary, which I recognise Alex Cole-Hamilton's reflections upon. The second point is around our confidence in new hospitals. Alex Cole-Hamilton's listed some projects that he has named. I obviously have an interest in a hospital project that my constituents will want confidence in, the New Monklands Hospital in my constituency. And I believe that the process that has been established, not waiting for the conclusion of these inquiries through NHS Assure, gives me, gives Parliament and the public greater assurance that lessons have been learned as to what happened with the Edinburgh and Glasgow situations, and that we can make sure that we have buildings that come forward in a timious, safe and effective way.
Stuart McMillan, to be followed by Ros McCall.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary mentioned the National Infrastructure Board during the course of his statement, so can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if he can provide more information about how the Board provides national oversight and supports health and care service needs?
Cabinet Secretary.
Absolutely. The NHS Scotland National Infrastructure Board plays a vital role in guiding the strategic development and investment in NHS Scotland's infrastructure, ensuring that it can effectively support the delivery of healthcare services. A key function of the board is to provide advice and direction on long-term whole-system strategic planning for NHS Scotland's infrastructure, and the board considers how best to ensure that current infrastructure remains safe, resilient and fit for purpose, and it also looks ahead, 20 or 30 years hence, to participate future needs, and it helps to shape NHS Scotland's future infrastructure investment programme.
Thank you. Ros McCall, to be followed by Ben McPherson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I note the statement highlights that the report also raises concerns that there were a number of instances where the governance process or aspects of operational management were ineffectively implemented. And we know now that that resulted in 1,586 appointments in paediatrics being affected. It's very worrying that children experience a reduction in care due to operational management inadequacies. So what work has been done to assess the impact of this on the children in regard to their treatment at the time and since then?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think Ros McCall makes a very fair point, and one that I'll need to come back to her on, in terms of the impact that there has been. This is some time ago now, but what impact there has been of the delay in the opening. As I said in response to Alex Cole-Hamilton, and as I said in my statement, I believe that the delay was necessary, but that will have had impact for patients, for the children and for their families. I recognise that, so I will endeavour to respond more formally to Ros McCall in her direct question.
And Ben McPherson.
The Cabinet Secretary talked about the significant remedial works that were required, and that the remit required the inquiry to make recommendations to ensure that any past mistakes are not repeated in future NHS infrastructure projects. The Cabinet Secretary has spoken about this at some length in answers to others, but is there anything more that the Cabinet Secretary would like to say about how the Scottish Government plans to make sure that lessons are learned, particularly with regard to NHS Lothian and my constituents, and also keep Parliament informed about the inquiry and the implementation of the recommendations?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Ben McPherson for his question. I think I've set out where I think the process can be improved to avoid those issues arising in the first place. The process that is involved through the Infrastructure Board, through NHS Assure, I think improves that position. We are obviously interacting with boards, including with Lothian, to make sure that the recommendations are understood, that the lessons can be learned, both from a communications and a process perspective, so that the issues that have been raised by Ben McPherson in terms of the infrastructure and indeed the impact on his constituents can be properly addressed, and that we do have a better process going forward for the people that he represents.
Thank you very much. That concludes this item of business. There will be a brief pause before we move on to the next item of business to allow front benches to change.